in every organization that, I've been in, a lot of the things that we've had to do is change how security operated because it was no longer meeting the needs of the business. The business had now eclipsed where it was moving so much faster.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative and Wiz is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as from other top CISOs and security thought leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Marc Varner, CISO at Lowe's and previously CISO at Yum Brands and McDonald's.
Sometimes it's better to be blessed than good. I actually started really more out of chance than anything else. I was a traditional technologist and came from an infrastructure background, came into software engineering way back in the days when Novell was around and we were doing 3.11 to 3.12 conversions, and that was the big thing, and OS2. And I was just doing regular operations and those types of things. And then one of my companions had gone to the security group, which at the time I was with Arthur Anderson, and really even having an information security group 23 years ago was actually pretty avant-garde at that time. And he went over to the other group and we were at lunch one day and he said, this is really cool. We're doing some, really cool things and it's very different than what we were doing before. You ought to check into it. And a week later, I had a conversation slant interview with a guy that was running firm-wide information security at the time, Steve Schultz, who's still a very good friend of mine. And as they say, the rest is history. I started doing that. I went into the risk management group first and fell in love with it and just have been enamored with the entire industry ever since then.
It's always interesting to me how many people in the security field fell into the security jobs.
Yeah. Well, I always make this, joke to people, but it's not so funny when you really think about how fast things have changed and how quickly they turn. To think about the fact, and I always think about this too, having kids going into college now, where they look at a 17 or an 18-year-old kid and go, what do you want to do the rest of your life? And how ridiculous that is that we're asking somebody that question. And sometimes I try to pour in and lean in on kids that are trying to figure that out because we put so much pressure on people to do that, young people at this stage. What I do for a living, and has been a very successful job that I've absolutely loved for all my life, didn't even exist as a career choice when I started down that road and when it was time for me to be picking that. So it's just amazing to me that something that is now so important in so many organizations and it creates so much wealth for people and it's such a great career path. It didn't even exist 20 years ago, which is just an amazing thing to think of.
And I had a similar experience in college. I started off as a math major, then I was an accounting major, then I was a business administration major. Then I got my first job as a computer programmer. Then I ended up managing DBAs and data modelers for a bunch of years and then got into security. And it was by accident as well. Right. So it is fascinating, but how all these things kind of tie together. Yeah. So we were talking recently about leadership through adversity, and you had some very, I think, insightful thoughts in your career where you've led through that adversity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Man, I wish I could remember those insightful thoughts because I'd just repeat those. I think the most recent example, obviously, that's clearly on everybody's mind is COVID. And it seems like that was, we talk a lot about that, about how, tough of a time that was for everybody. I really truly believe that for most security organizations, it really wasn't as hard as we tend to think it was. I think that I, in my career, have gone through far more adversary or adversity, or times that brought about stress and pressure more so than that. And I think it was just because COVID largely was a pressure on our business, and it made security and technology look at things a little differently. And obviously, lots of organizations were impacted differently. But for many of the organizations I know, especially from a technology perspective, it was kind of Tuesday. The VPN usage went up. And so your big issue is like, oh my gosh, can we accommodate that many people that quickly? And there was a lot of companies that are so remote by nature now that it was really a non-event. But even the ones that now suddenly had people going, it's not rocket science to spin up extra VPN tunnels. It's just buying more licenses and things like that. Now, there were real challenges that we had to face, like deploying machines and bringing machines back in a completely remote environment when nobody could actually see each other or have human contact or whatever the case is. Those things were a little difficult, but I think it was more not from a technology perspective as it was, how is your team going to operate, and can they still collaborate, and can they still get great work done? And I think largely for a lot of the technology people, we're already so used to doing that. And for us, we were already in multiple locations, so it really made no difference whatsoever. But I wouldn't want to discount it for other organizations. I think some of the other times that were probably far more impactful were working through organizational changes or merges or acquisitions. One of the big challenges that, probably the largest challenge in my career was when I was with Andersen and I was expated to the UK to globalize the security function. And while I was there, living in a house paid for by the firm and driving a car paid for by the firm and pretty much everything, that's when the firm went out of business. And that's when Enron occurred. And so at that very time, pretty much, the entire company was falling apart piece by piece, some more organized, some less organized. And sort of my job at the end of that was to disassemble the pieces that a whole bunch of other firms and places were buying. And when you've got a really consolidated environment where most of those things were really webbed together tightly on the infrastructure side, going in and finding out how you're going to successfully and securely separate 7 different businesses buying something that all that data is now kept on one server and in one place was really pretty challenging, while you really didn't have the support of a company that was, you kind of knew that, things were going, awry and it wasn't going to be around forever. So figuring out how to do that and retain composure and do things the right way for the right reason was really, a big challenge. And then obviously you had teams that were pulling apart as you spoke and those things going on. So I think that was probably one of the most challenging, times that I've personally ever had. And then, I think secondly to that is just bringing other teams through transition. So there's been more than once in my career where I've taken over in positions where there was not necessarily strong leadership or a dedicated CISO position prior to that. So I think that is really bringing a team through a lot of adversity, because if those teams haven't had that level of leadership, that also means that they probably haven't had that level of accountability or really kind of accessibility to the rest of the C-suite. And so once a company has dedicated a C position to lead the security function, it tends to raise the bar or raise the exposure of that group as well. Just because if it's become important enough now that they're going to dedicate a C position to it, that's probably because security has suddenly become more important to the rest of the organization. And I think as good as that sounds to most security people, that it would sound good, it also comes with a whole lot of, different things that maybe the team was not used to before. C-level exposure, having to present to the board and have accountability to the board, having a much bigger say in where some of the things go and how some of the processes go. And, everybody wishes for that seat at the table. And then all of a sudden you get that chair and realize that there's a lot of other things that come along with that. So I think bringing a team along in that level of exposure, and not allowing for them to be overwhelmed by that, but at the same time embrace the moment, has always been kind of an interesting balance, to walk a team through for me.
How do you get the executives to be comfortable with risk?
Speak in their terms. I think it's really that easy. I think sometimes we tend to overthink a security issue different than any other issue when it comes to risk. So I've had the privilege of working for a couple CFOs and really financially based people that got into technology and they became executives, but their start was in finance. You'll find nobody that understands risk better than a finance person or a CFO. They deal with it every single day. Do we invest in this? Is it an expenditure or is it an investment? How are we going to present this data? I mean, that's all that, those people are doing every single day. So they're quite accustomed to risk. What they may or may not necessarily equate that to is, what does it mean in terms from a technology perspective? If you do this, this is the level of things that could happen. If you're going to speak to them in a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo terms, yeah, you're probably going to lose them. But if you can water that down to just being terms of risk and speaking in a generic format, you'll find that they can make really good informed decisions pretty easily. And in fact, in our mission statement, for the last 3 organizations that I've worked for, the word security doesn't even exist in the mission statement. It literally reads something along the lines of, our job is to ensure that our leadership is making informed risk-based decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's the best that you can ask for. Yes, our group takes care of 80% of those choices. They're not really choices. We can make those things. That's what they, hire a me for. But when it really comes to some of the other things that you've got to figure out, like, well, what's the materiality of that? Would it really be something that we should worry about at a macro level? Again, they're really great at making those choices. It's our responsibility to put it in the correct context. And then getting them comfortable with it is just being honest and transparent with them about what does that really mean. And I think that's also a very important art. I've learned, I've always hated FUD, never deal in fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because when it doesn't happen, all your reputation is gone. I also think that pendulum can swing way to the other side where we try to sugarcoat things too much. I have learned over the last few years that sometimes that doesn't sound like a pleasant term, but sometimes they just want to be punched in the face with, what does it mean? What's the impact to me? And don't try to make it sound better or fluffy or whatever the case is. Just speak in honest terms and simple terms. And I think that they react to that far better.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers.
So how do you support your assertions so that we're not going down this FUD place? Do you leverage different types of data to demonstrate things, or go to the financial numbers? Or what sort of techniques do you use?
Yes, so that's a great question. I have moved to simplifying my risk conversations into 3 buckets: legal and regulatory, and operational, and brand and reputation. And if you think about everything that we could possibly cover and things that will hurt us, they really kind of fall into one of those 3 buckets. And what it also does is it simplifies the conversation as to who owns the responsibility for that. So if it's a legal and regulatory issue, not to sound easy, but that goes to my legal group or my PCI group or my privacy group. And it makes it very simple because there's no fuzziness around that call. They either say yes or no. You've got the operational side, which is very interesting because so in my instance today, what I'm doing is that I would go to store operations people and I would say, okay, if the website goes down or if this happens or that happens, this could be the impact to our operations. And what does that mean? And that could be the store shuts down. It could be that Log4j has affected one of our third-party delivery vendors, and none of our contractor deliveries will go out for the Eastern Seaboard if that particular vendor or that third party went down with a problem. So that becomes an operational thing that an operational person, that's their responsibility, can make a good judgment call on. The one that's the fuzziest of all of them is brand and reputation, because for some reason, people seem to struggle with putting a real hard dollar figure on that, or what does that really mean, or what would that be worth, which sometimes I find humorous because you can trail all the way back to your marketing budget and you can figure out what brand and reputation is worth to your company pretty easily. I mean, I always find it ironic that we spend millions and millions, if not billions of dollars in some companies building the brand and the reputation of a company. And then we all scratch our head trying to put a dollar figure on what it would cost if something were to happen. And you're thinking, well, you just spent what number of millions of dollars trying to convince somebody that your brand is the best at whatever it is that you're doing. And then we all struggle with why that one's so nebulous. And I don't consider it so nebulous, but it's a harder conversation.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, Larry Poneman tried to put some numbers around, reputation cost, and he started looking at things like customer churn, is one way. What does that cost us to get a new customer? How many customers are going to leave? What's the stickiness of that customer? And I think that was pretty interesting because it is very hard to put a value on that number.
And there are unpredictable things that can then come down to a catastrophic event. And the one that I brought up, and again, because I came from Anderson, I feel like I'm a bit of an expert at brand and reputational loss. But if you look back to that event, from the original time the Nancy Temple email went out and the communication to the last them relinquishing their last CPA license in any of the countries that they operated was 6 months. You're talking about one of the most trusted and oldest firms in the United States with 82 to 83,000 employees worldwide operating in 89 countries at the time, literally going from a going concern to relinquishing the last license of what their core business was in a 6-month period. And it's all based upon brand and reputation, because was there anything wrong with what the rest of the 83,000 people were doing? No, it was one practice and one problem that happened in one area. But if you're the board of directors, who's going to renew that contract for the one that, was going through that as their auditor of choice? It's just not going to happen. And so though it sounds extreme, there are catastrophic things that can happen in the brand and reputational side of that if information security is breached.
That's a very good point. And, just a great illustration of how important that brand is and how quickly things can disappear. So as you're working through adversity in companies, how do you get people to get on board with change and to change that process? And I think, you've called, organizations sometimes are like organized chaos. How do you get them on board to support those changes?
Yeah, I always try to put change in a positive light as much as you possibly can, and to say, what are the positives that are going to come from the organization when you change? I think the inevitable thing, though, is that you have to get around people's fear. And what is that necessarily going to mean? And sometimes getting around the fear is to show what's around the corner. What most of us don't like and what we fear most is those things that we don't see and don't understand. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that really they warrant fear. It's just the fact that we don't know that gives us that anxiety. And so for me, I think the quicker that you can show people what the result of what that is going to be and the why behind that, then it's easier to swallow the change and sort of the discomfort that you're going to go through. And I would just say in every organization that, I've been in, a lot of the things that we've had to do is change how security operated because it was no longer meeting the needs of the business. The business had now eclipsed where it was moving so much faster. A really great near-term example of that would be the speed of development. Waterfall. Waterfall was easy for security people. You had this thing you could follow, you had staging, you had all these environments, and it was nice and ticked and tied. And now you've got Agile, and you have developers running around making 25, 30, 50 changes a day, which would give any security practitioner, absolute nightmares of how to figure that out. So how do you navigate that change, and how do you figure out, okay, well, if our organization can just rearrange how it does its operations, we can get back in front of the business, or at least be walking alongside of them and the developers. And here's the angst that comes out of the system, and here's the risk that comes out of the system. If we can make that transition to doing things differently so that we're keeping pace with them. I think by showing people the positive side of what's going to be the result if we do this correctly is a much easier way, because if not, it just seems like you're doing change for change's sake, which just unsettles everybody and it injects anxiety. And if you haven't brought people along to help them understand what the benefit of that is going to be, then it just becomes an inconvenience, and it's really hard, for people to swallow and get on board with. But you can be such a powerful catalyst if you can get everybody sort of rowing in the same motion and understanding that everything's going to be fine at the end of it. I think it's getting around that uncertainty and showing people what's at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, really encourages people to jump on the change board rather than fear it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. And people love to be associated with something where they're building something of benefit versus avoiding some bad thing.
It's a great point. And especially even keeping morale up and things like that. I always make the joke that, if you go into baseball, the clubhouse is a great place to be if it's a winning team, right? It stinks if it's a bad team and they're losing, they got a losing record or whatever the case is. It's not a pleasant place to be. Nobody ever walks in the winning baseball team and goes like, hey, what's it like in the clubhouse? Well, it's great because you're winning. Of course it is. So, I think, it's just kind of that simplicity, really.
Well, Marc, this has been great. And I always enjoy talking with you. And what sort of final advice would you like to give to our listeners, where their current experience or emerging CISOs as they go down this journey?
I think, what you spoke about earlier with risk management is probably, a really, really important thing that it's easy for us to lose sight of. We get cornered into being the security group way too often, I think. And, I've actually changed the name of it a couple of times in different organizations to, a risk, the technology risk management group. I really don't like the moniker of security because it makes our job so simplistic when it's really not. Anybody can secure a computer, throw it in the ocean, destroy it, do something. It's fairly easy to do that. It's also useless as a business tool. The whole art of what we do and kind of the value that we add back to the business is helping them manage risk in this particular area. So, for me, I think one of the things just to always keep at the forefront of your group is, from a risk management perspective, and really tying that back to this sounds like an old, adage from your CISSP days, but, the CIA triad is real. We tend to get cornered into the C all the time. People want us to make sure that the data is confidential and it's secure and all those other things. They don't necessarily so much think of their security people as the ones that are also worried about the integrity of the data. So if you're talking about large marketing campaigns and somebody getting into your data, again, if data is the new gold, and if I really want to infiltrate your network or your organization and cause you pain, let me mess with the integrity of your data, and I can almost do as much damage as if I had just stole it, maybe even more, because you wouldn't necessarily notice it. It's not as blatant. And then obviously from an availability perspective, how operational we keep our company oftentimes falls on our shoulders as well. And people don't necessarily understand that, when you're in the middle of a DOS attack, they get it. But when you're talking about why you're trying to secure a database in, some obscure system that nobody really thinks about, has the potential to completely disrupt your business in some way. And for us, it would be shutting down a store or losing our e-commerce site or something like that. I just think that we don't spend enough time as security people kind of pushing our weight around in those other two areas as much as we probably could and should.
Excellent point. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for taking the time to talk to our listeners today.
You're very welcome. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Wiz is on a mission to help every organization rapidly identify and remove critical risks in their cloud environments. Purpose-built for the cloud, Wiz delivers full-stack visibility, accurate risk prioritization, and enhanced business agility. Wiz connects in minutes using an agentless approach that scans both platform configurations and inside every workload. We perform a deep assessment that goes beyond what standalone CSPM and CWPP tools offer to find the toxic combination of flaws that represent real risk. To learn more about Wiz, please visit securityweekly.com/Wiz.